It had been over 20 years since I last stepped foot in Salem, and yet, as my car rolled past the old bakery, the shuttered antique store, and the crooked maple trees that lined Willow Lane, I felt like time hadn't passed at all. Everything looked the same. Everything smelled the same. Even the sky had that weighty grey quietness I remembered from my childhood, like it was holding back something it didn't want to say. I parked across from the house. The house. My father's house, now empty of his voice, of his cough echoing from the den, of his footsteps pacing during late-night calls I never understood. The windows were curtained, the porch light was off, a strand of ivy climbed the left side, like it had always been trying to get in. I sat in the car for a long moment, engine off, but my fingers still gripping the steering wheel. The brooch on my coat, silver, shaped like a swallow in mid-flight, pressed cold against my chest. My mother had given it to me when I turned 12. She told me swallows always return home. I was too young then to understand that coming home isn't always about comfort. Monica was already inside. Of course she was. She'd flown in the day before, had coordinated the funeral arrangements, spoken to the lawyer, even picked out the hymns. That was her way, first in line for everything, except when it came to pain. Pain she left for others. I opened the door and stepped out into the misty morning. My boots hit the gravel with a dull crunch. No one greeted me. I hadn't expected anyone to. This was Monica's show, and I was the guest who arrived without an invitation. The front door opened just as I reached the steps. She stood there, her silhouette framed in the doorway like a painting. Same perfect posture, same tightened jaw, same cold eyes that once looked through me more than at me. "You made it," she said. No smile. Just 3 words balanced delicately between contempt and indifference. "I came for Dad," I replied, brushing past her into the hallway. The scent inside hit me like a forgotten memory. Lemon polish, old books, and the faintest trace of cigar smoke. My father's presence lingered like dust on the banister. I paused at the base of the stairs and let the silence settle over me. It wasn't grief I felt. Not yet. It was something quieter. Regret, maybe, or the sharp ache of something left unresolved for too long. Guests murmured softly in the parlor, familiar faces, neighbors, former colleagues, distant cousins. I nodded at a few, but no one approached. They knew the history, or at least Monica's version of it. The funeral service was brief, closed casket. My father had always been a private man, even in death. I sat in the last pew of the living room, my fingers tight around the hem of my coat. Monica sat up front, flanked by old family friends, her grief staged and graceful. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My mourning had started long before today. After the final prayer, Mr. Geller, the family lawyer, stood and cleared his throat. He held a thick folder in one hand, his expression unreadable. "We'll begin the reading of Mr. Bennett's will in a few minutes," he announced. "Family only, please." That's when Monica stood up. "I just want to say something first," she said loudly, turning to face the room. "There's no confusion here. Everyone knows who was there for Dad, who sacrificed, who stayed, who made this house run, and everyone knows who didn't." Her eyes landed on me, cold and unwavering. I just hope people remember that when names are read. There it was, the line she had waited years to deliver, the silent accusation now spoken out loud. I felt the room stiffen, all eyes drifted toward me. I didn't move, didn't flinch, let them look, let them wonder. Mr. Geller coughed gently, trying to steer the moment back into something civil. "Shall we begin?" Monica sat down with a triumphant little smirk, like she'd already won, like there was nothing left to say. But something told me this wasn't over. Not yet. Mr. Geller opened the folder with practiced calm, his fingers brushing over the pages, as though he knew this wasn't going to be easy for anyone. He'd known our father for decades, represented him through business deals, property disputes, even a messy loan to a cousin that nearly ended in court. But this was different. This was blood. "I will read the will exactly as it was finalized and signed by Richard Bennett on January 12th of this year," he began. No changes were made thereafter. The date stopped me cold. January 12th, just a few weeks before he passed. He knew. He knew the end was near. And still, he hadn't called me. No letter, no phone call, nothing. Just this, Mr. Geller continued, his voice steady and firm, as though that could hold the room together. To my eldest daughter, Monica, I leave the house at 14 Sycamore Lane and all its contents, with the exception of the items I've designated separately in this document. Monica nodded, already expecting it, her hands folded neatly in her lap like she'd rehearsed this. To Monica, I also leave the remaining balance of my primary bank account and the deed to the lake cabin in Vermont. A few gasps from the room. The lake cabin had been the family's only real luxury. Monica looked around, triumphant again. I swallowed hard, the brooch pressing into my skin like a warning. Stay silent. Stay still. Mr. Geller flipped to the next page. To Elaine. My name stopped the air. Monica's eyes narrowed. I leave a small safety deposit box stored at Salem Federal Bank, to be opened only in the presence of my lawyer. He paused. That is all. Monica's voice broke through before anyone could speak. A safety deposit box, that's it? She laughed, bitter and sharp. You're joking, right? After everything I did? And she gets a secret? My cheeks burned. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. It's what your father wrote, Mr. Geller replied, cool and professional. The contents are confidential until Elaine chooses to open it. The room was quiet, uncomfortable. I could feel them shifting, wondering what could possibly be in that box that mattered. Jewelry, old bonds, or maybe just a final insult, a box full of nothing, a reminder of what I never was to him. But somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't nothing, because my father didn't do anything without reason. After everyone filed out, Monica confronted me in the hallway, her voice low but shaking. He left you something because he felt guilty. That's all it is. Guilt. I met her eyes for the first time in years, not to fight, just to see her, really see her. The anger, the need to be seen, the loneliness beneath it. Maybe, I said quietly. But guilt means he remembered. And for the first time, she didn't have a response. The sky had turned to a dull silver when I stepped outside. The air was thick with that late winter dampness where every breath feels like it's carrying the weight of something unsaid. I didn't wait for Monica to say goodbye. I knew she wouldn't. I didn't even tell anyone I was leaving the house. I just left. The bank was only a 10-minute drive from the house. It sat on the corner of a quiet block, sandwiched between a law firm and an old hardware store with sun-faded signage. It looked almost exactly the same as it had when I was a kid, when my father used to drag us along to take care of business. Monica would sit stiffly in a chair, legs crossed and composed. I'd sit on the floor doodling in the margins of deposit slips. I parked in the back lot and sat in the car for a while, fingers tracing the edges of the brooch. The silence inside the car felt louder now. He remembered me. That's what I kept thinking. Not fondly, maybe. Not with warmth. But enough to leave me something private, something Monica couldn't touch or twist. Inside the bank, everything smelled sterile. Polished wood, ink, and the faint scent of coffee. I gave my name at the counter. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes and a loosened tie, nodded. We've been expecting you, Miss Bennett. Mr. Geller left instructions. He led me down a narrow hallway to a small private room. There, on the table, sat the box, matte black with a brass latch. My heart beat loud enough to feel in my ears. He left me alone. I sat. My hands hesitated at the latch. What if it was empty? Or worse, what if it was cruel? A letter laced with blame. A final note reminding me of every missed birthday, every phone call not returned. I opened it. At first, all I saw was a stack of envelopes, yellowed at the edges. I reached for the top one, my fingers trembling. My name was written on it. Just Elaine, in his handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. There were 4 envelopes total. One addressed to me, one to Monica, one marked "Do not open for the cabin," and one with no name at all. Beneath the letters, folded neatly in the bottom of the box, was a photograph. I hadn't seen it in years. It was the three of us, Mom, Monica, and me, standing on the dock at the lake cabin. I was maybe 9. Mom was wearing her sun hat. Monica had her arms folded, squinting at the camera. And Dad, he was behind the lens. His shadow long on the wood. Taped to the back of the photo was a note. There was a time when we were still trying. My chest tightened. I opened my letter. It wasn't long. Barely a page, but every word hit like a drop of water in a dry well. Elaine, you were never easy to understand, and I was never patient enough to try. That's on me. I knew Monica would take care of everything practical. That's who she is. But you see what people forget to say. There's something at the cabin that was always meant for you. I didn't know how to say that out loud. I don't know if this is enough, but it's what I have. Dad, I didn't cry. Not yet. But the tears sat at the edge of me, like rain waiting to fall. Something at the cabin. Something he didn't leave in the will. Something he wanted me to find. I closed the letter, placed the other envelopes carefully back in the box, and pressed my palm over the photograph. There was still something unfinished between us, and maybe it was waiting for me in Vermont. The road to Vermont was long and winding, and the farther I drove from Salem, the quieter everything inside me became. Trees blurred past the windows in tall, solemn rows, their bare branches like dark veins against the grey sky. Snow still clung to the shoulders of the road, melting into thick patches of slush that hissed under my tires. I didn't rush. Every mile between Monica and me felt like a breath I didn't know I needed. By the time I reached the cabin, it was almost dusk. The lake was still mostly frozen, a sheet of muted silver under the fading sky. The trees around it stood like silent witnesses, untouched, unbothered by time. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, less like a family retreat, and more like a forgotten memory. I stepped out of the car slowly, the cold biting into my cheeks, the crunch of old snow underfoot oddly grounding. I hadn't been here since before Mom died. My last clear memory was of her sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, humming something I never knew the name of, while Monica and I argued over who would get the top bunk. The key still worked. Inside, it smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly metallic. Old radiator heat, maybe. The furniture hadn't moved. The mismatched cushions, the faded quilt draped over the arm of the couch, the clock on the wall stuck at 4:11. It was as if time had been asked to wait. I walked through the room slowly, my boots echoing on the wooden floor. I didn't know what I was looking for, just that it was here, something he left for me. In the small study at the back, I found the safe. It was built into the floor, under the rug, the one with the navy blue border I used to lie on as a kid while Dad read the newspaper. I knelt, brushed aside the rug, and stared at the rusted handle. The combination was written in the corner of the envelope he'd marked, "Do not open for the cabin." 3 numbers. They meant nothing to me. But the safe opened with a heavy click. Inside was a single wooden box. No lock, no hinges. Just a smooth, sliding lid. And when I opened it, I stopped breathing. It was filled with letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me. Dates ranging from 1989 to just last year. The first one on top read, Elaine, age 13. I sat on the floor, the cold seeping into my knees, and opened the first envelope. "You didn't talk much this week. I think something happened at school. I wanted to ask, but your mother said I shouldn't push. I know I'm not easy to talk to. I know I say the wrong things, but I see you. I just don't know how to say it out loud." I read another and another. Each one was like stepping into a memory I hadn't known existed. He had written to me through my life but never sent them. Never spoke the words aloud, just stored them here in a box hidden beneath years of silence. He had watched, he had felt, he just hadn't known how to tell me. I stayed on the floor for hours reading each one. The sun disappeared, and I didn't turn on a light. I let the dark come in, soft and slow, like a blanket, and in the quiet of the cabin I realized something. My father hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me the only part of him that had ever been real. I spent the night in the cabin. No heat, no phone signal, no sound beyond the occasional crack of ice shifting on the lake outside. I wrapped myself in one of Mom's old quilts, the kind with uneven stitches and mismatched patches, and sat by the small fireplace where only ashes remained. I couldn't bring myself to light a fire, not yet, not while those letters sat beside me like fragile bones pulled from the earth. Sleep came in pieces, interrupted by memories that weren't quite memories, moments that I must have lived, but hadn't noticed he'd lived them too. The way he described me at 16, sitting on the back porch with my knees drawn to my chest. The fear in his words when I moved out west without a real plan. The regret, not poetic, not polished, just honest. In the morning, I opened the envelope meant for Monica. I hesitated. It wasn't mine, but part of me needed to see how he saw her. If he'd written her letters too, if he'd told her something different, more. The letter was brief. Monica, you carried more than your share. I saw it. I relied on it. I know you think I favored you, and maybe I did. Not out of love, but out of fear. You were the only one I understood. This house, this land, this life, it was always heavy. You made it look manageable. You made it look clean. But there are things I didn't say. To you and to Elaine. Please don't turn this into a tally. There's more to a legacy than what fits on paper. It was the first time I'd seen him write to her without performance. No instructions, no commands, just admission. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. She deserved to read it herself. Outside, the lake had begun to thaw at the edges. Small patches of dark water peeked through, trembling under the wind. The trees around the cabin creaked softly, stretching against the cold. I packed the letters, all of them, into a satchel I found in the hall closet. They smelled faintly of wood smoke and thyme. I took one last look around the cabin, the faded curtains, the worn rugs, the silence that had kept so many things hidden. Before I left, I taped a note to the inside of the pantry door. I was here. I read them all. Elaine. I didn't know who it was for. Him, maybe, or me. On the drive back, I didn't stop. Not for gas, not for food. The silence was still with me, but it wasn't as heavy now. It felt quieter. When I arrived back in Salem that night, I went straight to Monica's house. She opened the door with that familiar look of suspicion, still wearing her mourning clothes like armor. She didn't invite me in. I read his letter, I said simply, holding the envelope out to her. I shouldn't have, but I did. She stared at it, didn't move. He left me letters, I continued. Years of them. He didn't send them. He didn't know how, but he wrote them. Her jaw tensed. Good for you. I could have turned around, left her there, guarded and bitter, but I didn't. Do you want to read yours? Her hand hovered in the air for a second too long, then took the envelope. She didn't open it, but she stepped aside, and for the first time in decades I crossed her threshold. The house smelled like lemon polish and fresh flowers, arranged too neatly in a vase by the fireplace, as if grief could be managed with symmetry. Monica's living room hadn't changed since the last time I was there, maybe 12 years ago. Same cream-colored rug, same heavy curtains, everything curated, precise, like her. I stood awkwardly near the doorway while she set the envelope on the coffee table, unopened. Her hands were still, folded over one another. She didn't sit, neither did I. Why did you come back? She asked quietly. I hesitated, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wasn't sure it would matter to her. I guess I didn't want to leave with only your voice in the room. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Maybe not, I replied, but there's more than one truth. She looked away, her jaw tightening. He always made it seem like everything I did was just expected. No thanks, no softness, just duty. I nodded. And he gave me silence. That was his language. We stood there for a moment, breathing in the complicated space between us. I could see the fatigue in her posture, the way her shoulders pulled in, as if she were trying to hold herself together with invisible thread. You were always softer, she said, her voice distant. Even when you were angry. I used to hate that about you. I used to think you hated me. She didn't deny it, just looked at the letter, still unopened, on the table. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "You don't have to do anything," I told her. "I just thought maybe you deserved to hear from him too. The part he never showed us." She sat slowly, her hands falling into her lap, like she didn't know what they were for anymore. I didn't sit yet. I watched her, the lines around her mouth, the weariness in her eyes. "Do you think he loved us?" she asked. I didn't lie. "I think he didn't know how, but I think he wanted to." She didn't cry. Monica never cried, not even at Mum's funeral, but she picked up the letter again and held it gently in her lap, like something fragile she wasn't ready to open. I sat across from her, the silence stretching between us, no longer tense, just honest. For a while neither of us spoke. We let the weight of the years settle softly instead of crashing down. We were two daughters of the same man, two versions of the same wound. And for the first time, that didn't feel like an accusation. "I kept something," she said suddenly, "from Mom." She got up and disappeared down the hallway. I didn't follow. I stayed, watching the firelight flicker against the vase of two perfect flowers. When she returned, she held a small velvet box. She opened it in front of me. Inside was a matching brooch, a swallow. Gold, not silver. "She gave it to me when I left for college," Monica said. "She said it was a promise." I looked down at mine, still pinned to my coat, still holding my chest together. "Maybe she gave us both a way home," I said. Monica nodded, just barely. "I think I might read the letter later." "That's enough." She didn't walk me out when I left, but she didn't close the door either. That night, I couldn't sleep, not even with the letters beside me on the nightstand, not even with the knowledge that something between Monica and me had shifted. Barely, subtly, but enough to breathe differently. I sat by the window in the guest room at my aunt's house, watching snow flurries swirl beneath the streetlight, like dust in a forgotten room. Salem was quieter at night, the way I remembered it when I was a child, when I used to sneak out of bed just to press my face to the glass and listen to the wind, pretending it was saying something I couldn't quite understand. I reached for another letter. They weren't in order anymore. I didn't need them to be. They weren't a story. They were fragments of someone trying to be known. This one was dated 1995. "Elaine, you didn't come home for Christmas? I don't blame you. I'm not even sure you knew we expected you. Your sister made the ham. Your mother tried not to cry. I drank too much and pretended it didn't matter, but it did. I miss the sound of you humming in the kitchen. You used to do that when you were little. Just hum, like you were talking to yourself in music. I didn't say anything then because I didn't know how to tell you it meant something to me. I hope you're okay. I hope you're warm." I folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease with my thumbnail. I didn't remember that Christmas. Not exactly. But I remembered the years when the holidays stopped feeling like holidays and started feeling like something you survived. The next morning, I walked into town. I needed air, movement, something real beneath my feet. I ended up at the old bakery, surprised it was still open, even more surprised that the woman behind the counter recognized me. "You're Elaine, right? Richard's youngest?" Her tone was gentle, her hands dusted with flour. "I guess I still am," I said. She nodded, handing me a coffee and a warm blueberry scone. "He used to stop by here every Thursday," she said. "Always bought two of the same thing, one for him, one wrapped up. Said it was for his daughter, even if she didn't come by to get it." My breath caught. Every Thursday. I stared down at the scone in my hand. He'd been saving something for me even when I wasn't there, a pastry, a memory, a small ritual no one else knew about. "He stopped last winter," she added, her voice soft. "Said it was time to stop holding on." I nodded, thanked her, and left with trembling hands. Outside, the air bit through my coat, but I didn't feel cold. I sat on the bench across the street, broke off a piece of the scone, and took a bite. It tasted like childhood, and something else I couldn't name, like forgiveness still waiting to be spoken. He had wanted to connect. In his own quiet, flawed, incomplete way, he had tried, and I had spent years thinking I was invisible, but I hadn't been. Not to him. Later that day, I found myself parked outside the cemetery. I hadn't planned to come. I hadn't even realized where I was driving until I looked up and saw the iron gates, the frost-laced grass, and the familiar curve of the hill where my mother was buried. I hadn't visited her grave in over a decade, not out of defiance, out of something heavier, avoidance. Her name was still clear on the stone, Margaret Ann Bennett. The date etched below her name felt like a doorway I never walked through. When she died, I had already left home. I sent flowers, called Monica, but I didn't return. I couldn't face the silence that would follow. Now, standing there with her name before me, I felt it all at once. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," I whispered. "For you, for him, for me." I didn't expect a sign, didn't expect warmth, but the wind that passed through the trees behind me seemed softer, less sharp. "I always thought you saw me," I said, even when he didn't. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the curve of the brooch beneath my fingers. I pinned it to the scarf wrapped around my neck and stood quietly, letting the silence hold me. Then I saw Monica. She stood a little farther down the path, near our father's grave. Her coat was long and black, her hair tucked neatly beneath a wool hat. I didn't call out, I didn't walk over. She saw me, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then, subtle, barely visible, she nodded once. Not a greeting, not an invitation, just acknowledgement. And then she turned back to the stone, her hands clasped. I waited until she left before walking over. Our father's grave was still fresh, the dirt slightly uneven. No headstone yet, just a small metal marker with his name and the dates. Richard James Bennett, 1948-2025. I crouched, resting my gloved hand on the edge of the marker. "You didn't say goodbye," I murmured. "Not really." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. One of the letters. Not the first. Not the last. Just the one I had read the night before, where he had written, "If I could go back, I would sit with you on the porch and listen longer." I laid it down against the stone, tucked it under a small rock, and in that moment, I didn't feel peace. Not yet. But I felt something shift, like the beginning of softness, like the door creaking open instead of shut. The following week passed like smoke, present but impossible to hold. I stayed in Salem longer than I planned. My bag remained half-packed in the guest room, as if I was still deciding whether to go or stay. Monica didn't call, but one morning, a letter appeared in the mailbox at my aunt's house. No return address, just my name on the envelope. Inside was a note, short, typed. I read it. He said more than I expected. "There's a drawer in Dad's study you should look through. The bottom one. You'll know which. M." It was the first thing she'd written to me in years. I drove to the house that afternoon. Monica had already moved some of her things in, but the study remained untouched. Same scuffed desk, same old globe on the shelf with fading countries. I opened the bottom drawer and found a small wooden box, smaller than the one at the cabin. Inside were objects I hadn't seen in decades, a collection of old cassette tapes, each one labeled in our father's handwriting. Elaine, 1987, Monica, 1990, Lake Cabin, Summer Margaret, Anniversary, and one unmarked. I took them all home, borrowed an old tape player from a neighbor, sat at the kitchen table as the first tape began to spin. At first, just silence, then a cough, and his voice. Not the voice from my childhood, the sharp, decisive tone that often ended conversations before they began. This voice was slower, thoughtful, worn. "Elaine," he said, "it's late. You're 13. You fell asleep in the car on the way home from the lake. I carried you inside. Your mom said I should let you sleep, but I wanted to record this." I leaned forward, barely breathing. "You sang something earlier in the car. It reminded me of your mother. She used to hum that same tune when she cooked. I wish I'd told her that more." He paused. "I'm proud of you, even when I don't say it. Especially when I don't." The tape clicked softly as it kept spinning, his words lingering in the air long after they'd finished. I played the next, and the next. Each one revealing slivers of a man I never got to meet in life. A man who watched from a distance, recorded thoughts instead of sharing them, who stored his love in boxes and tapes because he didn't know how to hold it in his hands. The unmarked tape was last. I didn't recognize the setting at first. Then I heard wind, water, the lake. His voice came again. I'm tired, not in the way sleep can fix. I don't know what I'll leave behind, but I hope at least one of you understands. A long pause. Monica keeps everything going. She's the bones. Elaine, you're the breath. And then, nothing. I sat with that line for a long time. She was the bones. I was the breath. Two daughters of a man who couldn't say it when it mattered, but who left a trail behind. Enough for us to follow. I played the tapes again the next morning, this time slower, pausing after certain words as if hearing them through a different part of myself. My father's voice had stopped sounding like his and started sounding like someone new. Someone I might have loved if I'd had the chance to meet him properly. I thought about writing to Monica. I even picked up a pen, wrote a few lines, then tore the paper in half. Words still felt too sharp between us, too exposed. So instead, I made 2 copies of the tapes, one set for her, and I left them on her porch in a box, just like he had done for me. No note, just the tapes and a folded paper with 2 names, Bones, Breath. The next morning, her car was gone. The box was gone, nothing else. But that night, just before bed, I received a message. Just a single text. I listened, not all. Just enough. And then another. He didn't know how to love, but he did. In pieces. I sat on the edge of the bed, the message glowing in the darkness like something lit from inside. I typed back slowly. Maybe that's all love is. The parts that survive the silence. No reply. But she had read it. I knew she had. A few days later, I drove back to the cabin. I needed to leave something behind. I brought one letter with me, one I had written this time, to him. I read it aloud in the empty living room, the light from the window cutting soft across the floorboards. Then I folded it, slipped it into the wooden box where the others had been, and closed the lid. Not everything needed to be spoken. Before leaving, I stood on the porch for a long time. I could almost hear my mother's humming again, so faint it might have just been the trees. I pinned the swallow brooch to the doorframe just above the steps, pressing the metal into the wood until it held firm. Let it stay here, I thought. A promise kept, a sign of return. On the drive back to Salem, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but space. And in that space, the weight of his absence finally settled into something I could carry. Spring came to Salem like a secret slowly being told, petal by petal, breeze by breeze. The snow receded from the corners of the yards, and the trees outside my aunt's house began to bud, cautiously, like they weren't sure it was safe to bloom just yet. I was still in town. Monica hadn't said much, but she hadn't disappeared either. She'd returned the tapes with a note clipped to the top. I remember the lake, the summer he recorded that last one. I thought he was talking to himself. Maybe he was. I kept her note. It didn't say much, but it didn't need to. We were speaking now, even if only in fragments. One morning, I found myself walking to our father's house again. It had started to feel less like his and more like ours. Monica had made changes, fresh paint in the hallway, new curtains in the kitchen, but the study remained untouched. It surprised me until I noticed what sat on the desk, the photo from the cabin, now framed, Mom, Monica, and me, his shadow still stretching behind us. I stood there for a long time staring at the photo, remembering the day it was taken. I'd been cold. Monica had refused to smile. Mom had tried to get us to stand closer together. Dad had snapped the picture anyway, laughing from behind the camera. We never saw him laugh much, but that day we did. Monica entered quietly behind me. No announcement, just her presence. I found that in a drawer, she said. Didn't think I'd keep it. But, her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish. It's strange, I said. We lived in that same house with the same parents, and yet we remember it differently, she finished for me. Exactly. Monica leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely over her chest. I envied you, you know. The way Mom looked at you like you were made of something breakable. I envied you, I said, because you knew how to be who they needed. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something soft behind her eyes. Something neither of us had let the other see in years. I didn't know what to do with her death, she said, so I did what he did. I closed the door. I nodded. I left. That was my door. We were silent again, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Then Monica reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a small folded square of paper. I found this behind one of the cabinet panels, she said. It's from Mom. She handed it to me. It was barely legible, faded ink in our mother's delicate handwriting. If you ever come looking for peace, it's not buried. It's grown. Water it however you can. I held the note in my hands, the weight of it more than its size should allow. She knew, I whispered. Monica nodded. She always did. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just stood there. Two women who had finally stopped trying to win the same kind of love, realizing we'd both been carrying different pieces of the same grief. And maybe, just maybe, we were ready to start planting something new. The next weekend I returned to the lake cabin, not alone this time. Monica came too. We didn't plan it like a reunion. We didn't even speak much on the drive. But she showed up at my aunt's house that morning holding 2 coffees and a bag of groceries. I opened the door, stunned. You said you were going back, she said simply. I figured you'd forget to bring anything that wasn't emotional. I smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. The drive was quiet but not tense, the kind of silence that had shape and warmth. We passed familiar markers, old gas stations, a bent mile marker sign, the roadside diner where Dad once took us after we got stuck in a snowstorm. Neither of us mentioned it, but I knew we were both remembering the same night. At the cabin, everything was as I left it. The air carried that sharp scent of damp earth and pine, and the lake had begun to thaw completely. Ripples moved across the surface like breath. Monica walked in first, set the groceries on the counter, and wandered the rooms without a word. I followed. When she reached the brooch, still pinned to the doorway where I'd left it, she paused. You left it here. I wanted something to stay behind. She didn't respond, but after a long moment, she removed her own golden swallow brooch from her coat and pinned it next to mine. No ceremony, just quiet placement. 2 swallows, she said softly. I guess we both came back. That evening we sat on the porch. 2 mugs of coffee, a blanket shared between our laps. The sky was pale with evening light, the kind that stretches gently before fading. I never told you, Monica began, but I used to listen at the door when you played music in your room. You'd sing along to those sad songs. I used to wonder why you needed so many of them. They were the only way I could cry, I said, without anyone asking what was wrong. She nodded. We sat in that for a while. Then she asked, Do you think he meant for us to find each other through all this? I don't know, I answered honestly, but maybe that's what happened anyway. She leaned back, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of pine and memory. I don't forgive him, she said. I don't think I do either, I replied, not fully. But I see him now more than I did. That might be enough. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dock. In the quiet, I thought about the letters, the tapes, the rituals left behind like breadcrumbs. A man who couldn't speak his heart, but who left maps just the same. We weren't healed, but we weren't alone anymore either. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like hope. The next morning, fog hovered over the lake like breath holding still. I stood barefoot on the porch, a mug warming my hands, listening to the low hum of silence that only places like this know. Monica was still asleep inside, or maybe just pretending. Either way, I didn't disturb her. I walked down to the edge of the dock, each wooden plank groaning beneath me with a memory. I remembered being 9, shivering in a swimsuit, gripping a towel around my shoulders, while Monica dared me to jump in. I remembered our father standing at the edge with a camera saying, "Just smile, just once." I hadn't smiled, but I'd jumped. Now, I stood at that same edge and let the steam rise from my cup into the morning air. Everything felt both exactly the same and impossibly different. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a letter, the last one I had saved. I hadn't read it yet. Something about it had felt too final, like a door that wouldn't open again once shut. It was dated just 2 months before his death. "Elaine, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I've written so many versions of this, some angry, some soft. This one is just true. You were the piece I didn't know how to fit, and because of that, I left you outside more often than I should have, but you stayed close even when you were far. Your mother said you had a heart like tidewater, always pulling away, but never really gone. I should have said this when I had the breath. I saw you, even when I was pretending not to. I loved you in the only language I had. I just never learned how to say it aloud. Forgive me if you can." I let the letter fall to my lap. My throat tightened, not with anger, not even with grief, but with that deep ache of almost. All the closeness that almost happened, all the words that almost were said. I didn't cry, but I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me. When I returned to the cabin, Monica was in the kitchen making coffee, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. She looked at me, saw the letter in my hand, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her own coat pocket and slid a folded paper across the counter. "I wrote him back," she said. "I didn't open it, just placed it beside mine." We stood there, 2 daughters of the same silence, slowly writing our way out of it. That afternoon, we buried both letters beneath the tall pine behind the cabin, our mother's favorite tree. No markers, just the roots to keep them. That night, we stayed by the fire. The cabin had a way of holding warmth differently now, not just from the flame, but from something unspoken that had shifted between us. Monica sat cross-legged on the rug, nursing a glass of wine, while I curled up in the rocking chair with a blanket draped over my shoulders, the same one our mother used to wrap around us during storms. "I used to think you resented me," I said after a long stretch of silence. She looked at the fire, then back at me. "I did." I nodded. "But not in the way you think," she added. "I didn't resent what you had. I resented what I couldn't give myself permission to need." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw the girl underneath all the control. The one who had stayed, who had carried everyone else's weight because no one thought to ask how heavy it was for her. "I thought you hated me," I said. "I didn't. I just didn't know how to be your sister and my father's daughter at the same time." That hit me somewhere deep. Because I understood it, I'd spent so many years trying not to be like him. I never asked what it cost her to be exactly what he needed. We sat in that raw space for a long time, letting it stretch, letting it soften. Eventually, she reached over and handed me a small velvet pouch. "I almost sold this once," she said, "when I was broke and angry and trying to forget." I opened it gently. Inside was a tiny silver charm in the shape of a book. "I gave it to Mom when I was 9, she said. "Said it was for all the stories she used to read us. She wore it on her bracelet for years." I remembered it. "She took it off the day after you left home," Monica continued. "Said she didn't want to wear something that reminded her of what she'd lost." I closed my hand around it, feeling the shape press into my skin. "She didn't lose me," I whispered. "She just didn't know where I went." "She never stopped loving you," Monica said, "even when she didn't know how to say it." And suddenly everything clicked. The silence, the distance, the brooches, the swallowed words and missed chances. They had loved us, differently, imperfectly, quietly, but they had. Later, as we climbed into our beds in separate rooms, Monica paused at her door. "You know he wasn't good at showing up," she said, "but you were wrong when you said he didn't say goodbye." I looked up. "You were the last name he wrote." And with that, she closed her door gently and left mine open. I left Salem in late April. The dogwoods were just starting to bloom, those pale pink blossoms trembling on the branches like hands learning to open. Monica walked me out to the car without ceremony. No hugs, no long goodbyes, just a shared glance, a silent understanding. "I'll be back," I said, loading the last bag into the trunk. "You'd better be," she replied, almost smiling. She handed me a small envelope. "Don't open it until you get home." I nodded. The drive was long and I didn't rush. I let the miles pass like pages, each town a sentence, each turn a breath. By the time I reached my apartment, the light had gone gold. That soft kind of gold that only happens after letting go of something you've carried too long. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photo, me and Monica, standing on the porch of the cabin. She must have taken it with a timer. In it, we weren't smiling. Not exactly, but our bodies leaned slightly toward one another, like trees that had grown apart but bent back toward the same light. Tucked behind the photo was a note in her handwriting. We didn't get everything we needed from them, but maybe we can give the rest to each other. I sat on the couch for a long time, the note resting in my lap, the photo in my hand. She was right. Our parents gave us what they could, and what they couldn't. We'd have to build with what was left, not from scratch, but from fragments. Letters, brooches, tapes, a charm in the shape of a book, a nod across a grave. I still wore the swallow brooch. I didn't take it off even in sleep. It no longer felt like a question. It felt like a tether, a reminder that we return, even when it takes years, even when it takes silence, even when it takes death. Forgiveness didn't come like a lightning strike. It came in layers, in coffees shared, in doors left open, in a letter read under tall pine trees. I didn't forgive him all at once, or fully, but I forgave him in the ways that mattered. And I forgave myself for believing I was unworthy of being remembered, because in the end, I was the last name he wrote, and that was enough. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a silence, a wound, or a moment you've lived, don't just scroll away. Leave a comment below. Tell us, who did you have to forgive without ever hearing the words, "I'm sorry"? Your voice matters here, and if this story made you think of someone, share it. Someone out there needs to hear this today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. And now click on the next video that's about to appear on your screen. It might just say what your heart's been waiting to hear.